Hello, everybody, and welcome to But Why Though. And today we're going to talk about the decade-long video game that just released, College Football 25. I'm today's host, Matt, and I'll be joined with Kyle.
How's it going? Excited to talk about our long-awaited return to college football.
Yeah, and I guess can you tell everybody what you do as an introduction and everything else?
Yeah, so I am a writer and an editor for But Why Though, and I also am a professional soccer journalist for the Orlando Sentinel. So I like to dabble in both video games and sports, which works perfectly for this.
Sports, which is why we're here. But yeah, so getting to the thing, we're talking about some college football. I guess it's not called NCAA anymore because we've gone away from the time. But yes, it has been 10 years, the last one being NCAA 14. I still call the game NCAA 25. Whether that is right or wrong, it's not here nor there. I'm sure EA will be very upset. So yes, it is college football or EA College Football 25 or CFB for the proper name and thing. And after, like I said, a long tenure battle between what we've seen in the real life games, between the battles of both legal and just gameplay and other shuffling in the video game space, and then obviously conferences and all this stuff. But we're finally here and we're going to dive into it now. So I guess start off with what was your hype and expectations coming into this game?
Yeah, I was expecting after such a long wait that the same passion and the same emotions that we felt playing it 11 years ago would be recaptured now, right? And that's a lot of expectations. You get the years and years of nostalgia, and was it really as good as we remember it? And spoiler alert, it was going back and playing the old games. And so the idea was that hopefully this won't just be Madden with a different skin, but that this will be a return to the college football games that we know and love from so many years ago, just looking more modern and playing a little bit smoother now that the technology is advanced.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was one of those, like I sadly was not a big fan of the 14. I still think 14 is probably one of the part of the above average but weaker of the last, I guess, decade 2000s editions. But no, like I had missed it, and when this game got announced, the amount of people from across the country that I just known from growing up back to the 2 years like hit me up like, "Yo, are we back?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so like I was ready for this. I'm excited, but also had concerns. Everybody kept like my group chats were just like, should we play Madden? Does everybody just want to play Madden? Are we supposed to play Madden? And I'm like, I'm not playing Madden. So yeah, it was quite exciting and thrilling. I mean, obviously we had 3 year delay since the first initial announcement, so there was quite a bit of wait. Um, over here. So obviously for this thing, we're kind of probably talk about some of the gameplay that went through and what we think about that, and then kind of dive a little bit into the game modes and everything else. There's a lot to cover in this game. And so we'll kind of go through what we can so we don't just sit here for like 3 hours on the nitty gritty of everything.
We could
uh,
though.
we could. I mean, maybe that's for a later date. But I guess right out of the box, like, you hit that play now button, you get on the field, go thoughts.
So a couple things. I mean, the first thing, like the most important thing, is that it feels great.
Yes.
I think the first thing that I've sent to pretty much everybody I talked to was, "Oh my God, you can spin move again." Like being able to use the left and right stick to either juke or just really small maneuvers. There's a lot of control, but it's very fast and fluid. The reason I stopped playing Madden a couple years ago was because even running like a halfback counter, it takes the guy a solid like 3 seconds to make his cut move. It here, you get guys cutting in an instant, and it feels as fast and as exciting as you're used to seeing in college football. So that was really, really cool and really exciting when you're getting, you break off a big run and you're seeing your 97 overall speed outrun a guy with like an 80 and he's just zooming by him. So it's super, super fun in that regard. And honestly, pretty easy to get a hang of. I know the option system changed just a little bit. They flipped the way it works to keep the ball or to give the ball
It
away
definitely
in
was not just
options.
a little bit for muscle memory for some of us, which we'll get into
Fair
here in a
enough.
second. Um,
Yeah, no,
no,
so they made changes, and like the passing system is different. There's a new which I think is probably the biggest difference in terms of like it's worth learning the new system. I When I first started playing, I set it to classic passing system because I am an old dog and I don't like learning new tricks. So I was like, nah, I'm just gonna stick with what I know. And then I decided to toy around with a little bit as I was working on my review for the site, and I was going through it, and I was like, oh, this actually gives you a ton of control. There's a
right.
lot of like, if I want to throw a back shoulder fade, I can throw a back shoulder fade. Like I can do really, really specific passing things. It just takes practice to get used to, but there's a ton of control there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because obviously they had a pretty good media tour coming up here, showing all the gameplay footage when they did release stuff and breakdowns. And I was with you of like, what are we getting? But then when I first got in there, I was like, wow, this runs very smooth, very fluid. The controls feel nice. Um, I actually like the revamped passing system. Obviously, I think the game difficulty overall makes it somewhat hard to play. I do think this game is generally harder than the older game for sure. Obviously can't speak in terms of what it was for Madden, but I do think like it is the passing of like having the bar, a little bit of control and everything is good. Now, as far as your read option stuff, as a person with the muscle memory of you hold A to give it to your back versus you hold A to keep it, is just took me hours upon hour to figure out what we were doing. Um, and I understand the logic of why they went with this choice. Because even from my understanding, when I played Madden years back, that was still the consensus. If you give it to the back, you hold A, you go. If you want to keep it, you go. But the logical choice of like you should always be giving to the back, and then the other stuff is the option later. It makes sense. But then when you think of it in terms of the RPOs, it makes a lot more sense. And so I get why they made the changes. My only big issue, I guess, going into there was probably what we get to into some of the other menus, into the gameplay stuff is I don't think the game does a very good job of explaining some of the nitty-gritty controls of everything. I think the RPOs, the reads and everything, you can play some of the mini games, which is fine, but the mini game is a very simple version of it, so I don't think it helps as much. Obviously, they do have Ultimate Team where they lock some of the scheme behind there. I don't think those challenges are as well either. Um, but as far as just getting in there and learning controls and like playing the game, I think the gameplay itself went pretty well. From
Yeah,
movement wise.
yeah, you talk about like learning things. I know I talked about this with some people. My first time running an option play and my first time running a reverse play, there were like little pop-ups in the top left corner that explain the play, but there's no like it stops everything and gives you a big like notice of like, hey, here's what you're doing, here's how it works. That would have been for more experienced players that might have been a little annoying if they already like got a good grasp of it because I felt like these systems for me I learned relatively quickly, but maybe I was just misremembering how I had done it in the past or didn't have that muscle memory. So for me, I didn't notice as much of like I need to go look into how to do this, but it also like I could have just clicked through. I wouldn't have needed
Yeah.
a huge, it wouldn't have bothered me.
So
So it
so
would have
the
been helpful to have more of a tutorial like that
So the funny
for
thing is, like
sure.
you mentioned that, and I never saw that menu, and I went and asked a few people that I am playing in my dynasty, and none of them actually saw that menu either. So I don't know
Yeah,
if it was
that's
just a very quick thing and just like we didn't see it or
yeah.
what.
It was
And
like a
that's my thing of
pop-up.
like, and that's what I'm saying of like, I think the problem is because like, oh, we need all this stuff, and I was like, well, not that I don't really necessarily as much as I need it. It is a variance of like. I should have access to it at a lot of other times. Like if
Mhm.
I want it, I should be able to go find it because the control layout when you go there is a very simplistic version of it. And I think the fact that RPOs learning that system alone, I don't remember seeing too much within how that works of just the general because that was something that NCAA 14 actually as we move forward a decade is now something that's part of college football largely that was not back then.
Yeah, I think it definitely could have been a better job like explaining the new systems and
Yeah, because
explaining.
I think like the passing, the playing, the reads, maybe some adjustments, you can pick those up really quick. But as a lot of the other new stuff that like it does require more, like I said, the read option, which we always knew, but they completely changed it. And so if you never
Yeah.
played, it's great, you learn it. I based my offense off that for 2 decades, and so trying to like flip my mind, I still struggle with it to this day. I have to think in so weird was like a big problem. But saying all that, no, kind of moving with back to the gameplay stuff of just like I think the gameplay that ends up doing well. You feel the players, they move really well. I think having the options between like the catching, which we knew we've seen they adapted in Madden between the aggressive, aggressive on the run and stuff go. A defense definitely took some learning curve for me as a non-Madden player, but seemed like they implemented those well over here, I'm assuming. Um,
Yeah, I felt like they've been fine. The one interesting adjustment was I'm used to doing the X or A for Xbox, the secure catch. And in
Yes.
Madden, obviously, if you don't get touched and you hit the ground, you can pop up and keep going.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't do that here.
No,
And
no,
so
you cannot.
the first couple of times I realized like, oh, I pushed that and he's gonna go down to the ground. And otherwise that could have been I could have gone the extra yard for a touchdown or whatever. So there were a couple like moments where I ran into that, but it's very helpful to have these different options of obviously like, hey, I'm like I beat my man, I beat the corner,
Right.
do the catch in stride and just keep going. But being able to have the options. I've not had a ton of luck with the aggressive catch, like trying to do the more like kind of theatrical Odell Beckham Jr. one arm catches.
I've done a little bit on a short little fade routes, but that's about it.
Yeah,
Some
I
of
think
them
some of that.
videos, I'm like, I don't know. The computer has no problem doing it on me, but myself, it's not
Oh, for sure.
good.
No, and I think some of that's just like that's college football, right? You
Right.
get you get receiver, you get a lot of like really good plays, but you also got to get a lot of really like I can't believe you dropped that plays. So some of that ties into the way they do the player ratings and the way that's all made to mimic the disparity across college football. So it's been interesting to learn these systems while also learning, if you're playing as Georgia, you're rarely going to fail at trying to do a
Right.
lot of these things. But if you're playing as like New Mexico State, it might be a little bit harder.
So I know they made a big deal, especially leading up to the release, about all the new Audible system and everything else. Did you like the Audible system? I think offensively, I don't think it's bad, but it does feel not as refined as what it was, to be honest, in 2014. Defensively, I'm still trying to figure out what some stuff means, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to play defense well and get a stop.
Yeah.
So that's this is a lot
That
of trouble
I
there.
think that's been a consensus of everybody I know of defense. Once again, it's still very hard. Um, but yeah, I think this goes back to the tutorial thing. Some of the audibles on defense, I just genuinely have not been able to figure out what they do exactly.
It a lot of it requires, and I guess this is to their credit, that it's very detailed and as realistic as they can try to make it. A lot of it requires like a really deep knowledge of specific play calling and play types in the current college football climate. And
Right.
like when you just watch college football, you're not seeing what plays they're calling or what types of defenses. And most of us like average, just like people who watch on TV aren't gonna know. We know a little bit, but we don't know
Yeah.
nearly enough to say we're knowledgeable. So I've seen some videos of like actual players who are playing and they'll talk about what the different coverages are and how authentic it is to that experience. But as a casual who just comes in, again back to the tutorial thing, having ways to explain that is nice, but it's trying to learn what these different things mean and how it impacts the play calling and things like that. And it's hard. It's not as intuitive where you just like push two buttons and you're going to a specific play.
Right.
It's a little more involved, but it does feel a bit more kind of authentic with the changes that are being made and formations that are being changed. So I found obviously on defense, I'm still trying to feel my way around between both the play calling and just the being able to make defensive shifts and things like that. On offense, it's been a little bit easier to pick up
Absolutely.
more of just the pre-snap reads and shifting the offensive line, which they've made that feels like they've expanded that, being able to do
Yes.
like half shifts and things like that, which are really helpful. But again, it doesn't really explain a lot of that to you. You have to learn by
See,
getting sacked a million times
it
in a
sucks
row.
because everybody's like, "Well, you're just dumb at sports." I'm like, "No," because like when I stick like on for me when it goes like defense, when it goes inside, outside, over the top, underneath, I understand what those terms mean. But when I flip the stick and nothing of my bubbles or my zone coverages or nothing changes, it's kind of hard for me to explain. So what exactly are my players doing to then cover underneath? What exactly are my players doing to cover overneath? Or even like the sticks button. I'm assuming that means you want them to hover around the first down marker. Cool. I don't know from a video game mechanical standpoint of what my players are doing differently. And I think that's what like where I would like really like the tutorial because like even as a person who understands most of the terminology, you don't see the changes within the game of what's changing. Because before if you had like, hey, I want to play on the outside, you saw your safety zones move outsides. You saw them move shift inside. And this game, you press that, but there's nothing that moves. And so you're like, I think they're doing that, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think shoring up some of that, particularly on defense, is good. Offense, I don't disagree. I do miss some of the quick stick passes. So like if you want a short pass, but low pass, which I think they still kind of have, but it doesn't seem to function. And I think that might just be on playbooks, like it used to as well. But overall, I besides that, it's been pretty good just playing the game. You get in there and go.
Yeah, you can go in with like a basic understanding and do really well depending on the difficulty you're playing or the
Yes.
person you're playing against. So I felt like playing on like the varsity setting, right? You can go in and you don't really need to make a lot of changes. You just kind of call the play, run it, and you can have some success. But there's still some challenge to that. It's still not easy, but as you bump up to the harder difficulties, it becomes, if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not making the right reads, if you're not making the things, it is hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like the jump, I mean, one All American definitely feels challenging. The jump to Heisman is absurd. Um, I think I'm like now like 8 and like 14 playing on Heisman right now. It is still a very hard battle, depending what you do, which is good. I think for the most part, at least I know I can't speak for everybody, but I know for me, and then looking saying I wanted a challenging game because you do know like the other ones after about a season, you're like, oh, I figured this out. Let's go. Um, and you're just not seeming to hit that. Part of that's just because defense can sometimes we still have the robo quarterback where that quarterback just says hut, throws it, and looks like a machine. And next thing you know, he's like 20 of 22. And you're like, oh my gosh. But no, I don't disagree. Of like, it does seem to be more as you go up in difficulty, you need to use this audible system more and more. And it seems like it does help when you do it. Problem is, if you don't always do that or you miss it, you get punished very heavily for it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess from the gameplay and obviously that parts, what they also nail, atmosphere. I know everybody loves the college football atmosphere. I think they do a
Mm.
fantastic job so far, especially for the amount of, I guess, teams there are these days. We know they're fixing some logos and everything so far, but right now it's you get one of the big goals. You know, you get to watch the UGA run down the field, get the Washington Husky going. There's a lot of it's the setting's pretty good.
Yeah, the coolest moment was I'm a big UCF guy, and so when you get a UCF night game, there's a rocket launch, and they give you the little tidbit about how the 50-yard line is lined up with the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, which is real,
Yes.
and putting something like that in the game that like they didn't need to do, but they did, and it's awesome. There's definitely some hiccups, especially as you get to some of the lesser teams. You can only there's 134 teams. That's a lot to nail everything. I know like the Stanford logo was messed up and some small things that thankfully they're adjusting. I know there was some skepticism on are they actually going to go fix things or not. They seem very on top of it, which is good. But a lot of these atmospheres, you go to some schools, you see obviously the stadiums are very detailed, but even the way the players enter the field, the one thing that I complained about in both in my review and to everyone I've talked to though is pregame when they put the marching bands on the field, their feet are not moving together in time. And I'm a big marching band guy. I teach drumline. I do all this stuff. The most important thing in marching band is that all of your feet move at the same time. That is literally sometimes kids are told like don't play. You're not very good right now, but at least make sure your feet are in time. And so they have them all moving randomly, and it drives me insane every time because I feel like it's harder to program them to all be moving differently. But that's, I'm probably in the minority on that complaint, but oh, it drives me nuts.
I don't do the band stuff, but no, that is a funny, unique thing. And you know what? You might be in the minority in there, but obviously, I've seen over the vast decades of stuff of like NCAA people of like what people want in the game, what they miss. Like we want our logos, we want specific calls, specific traditions, and everything else. So I'm not, we'll
I
see
mean,
what
like
goes.
they do the eagle flying at Auburn games.
Yep.
They do the like little like wolf statue at North Carolina State Gate. Like there's so many things where it's just for fans of these teams, they are so important. And even for players and former players, like those things are what makes college football special compared to the NFL. There's more of a passion and allegiance there. And so the amount of things that they've tried to implement and put in here is part of why it took so long to make this. They really wanted
Right.
to get that atmosphere right. And that's between that and the gameplay, they really nailed the feeling of you are sitting here on a Saturday afternoon watching, the Pac-12 or I guess the Pac-2 after dark. Like you're enjoying these actual things and feeling like you're in the environment, which is super. They've got chants that are unique to different stadiums, songs that are playing, so many different things that make that so much more authentic and real. And for a game like this specifically, that matters more so, I think, than for pretty much any other sports game.
Yeah, I don't disagree. No, I'm with you. There could definitely be some fine tuning, but overall, I think they, especially for being 10 years and everything, I think they came out and they've nailed the gameplay, the atmosphere, and everything else. And I look forward to seeing one what the fine tuning is, but also just in general, like continuing to play, for a long time. Now, in order to keep playing, we kind of transition over into some of these game modes. You have to have something to play besides just playing play now. I guess you could. That'd be a little weird. But I guess we'll start with kind of we'll get to the beefier dynasty stuff for more towards the end of thing. But obviously Road to Glory, which was a kind of a renowned, kind of mode that's been around that kind of brought that back. To be honest, I'm gonna let you kind of go in here and talk about this one. I have not really touched mine. I'm not the biggest fan necessarily, and I just haven't got around to it as I've been trying to set everything else up. Your thoughts on Road to Glory so far is what we've gotten.
Yeah, so it's a little bit different than previous iterations, kind of builds on some of it, but there's the idea of you've got your player, you've got to focus on a couple things. You can every week you get a certain amount of energy to build different skills. So you can choose whether you're building your experience, whether your team leadership, which earns you more coach trust, your GPA, which is important in this
Is it
game.
important these days?
No, but it is in the game. Well, the one thing they tell you is if you get like a three, I think it's a 3.6 GPA across your first 3 years, your senior season, you don't have to worry about it. So you can spend your last year building up experience points and leveling up attributes and things like that. But every week, and the new wear and tear system plays into this a lot, where if you choose to focus primarily on XP, your player is going to be more injured going into the game, more beat up if you don't have enough energy to rest. So you go into a game where your player is like a moderate or severe risk of injury. Your stats are down. Everything's much harder to do, whether you're not as fast, you can't throw as far, whatever. So it really impacts the gameplay. So you've got it. There's a lot of strategy involved in picking what you're gonna do. It's not like incredibly in depth because there's only a couple options, but I actually found that really interesting. Where every week I was trying to decide what is it that I'm gonna do. There's also NIL deals. You can do stuff with social media and build up a following, and people will offer you NIL deals. And to be honest, I did it a little bit in my first season, and I just kind of was like, I don't really care. It's cool that it's there. Some of the offers that are there are cool. You get like little text messages about, hey, there's a local jujitsu studio that wants to give you free lessons and it'll give you +5 stamina permanently for like some energy for a couple weeks. So it's a cool, it's a hard NIL is a hard thing to implement when you're not using like real businesses or real things. You've got to kind of keep it cheesy intentionally. So it's fine. You also get some really cool, you'll get text messages from like teammates or classmates. My favorite is you get a classmate who texts you about like their girlfriend breaking up with them, and one of the response options is to ask for her number. So there are some unhinged, definitely 19, 20-year-old kid answers and things in there. So again, it's not like this huge like life role playing simulator, but there's enough in there to kind of make it fun. I remember there were some old games, some of the older ones, you would take like actual exams and things like that. You're not doing that here, but you do have to study to be prepared for the exams to keep the GPA up. So that's all interesting. And then you get into the actual gameplay. You can pick between quarterback, running back, receiver. I think it's like cornerback, linebacker, and might be one
That
other.
I think that might be it. I
Yeah,
was
so
like,
it's really limited, which I think they wanted to do just to kind of be able to flesh out what's there. It'd be nice to see more, but also realistically, I'm not gonna go play Road to Glory as like a left tackle. So it's fine. Those are kind of the
no,
big
I've
options.
seen those sickos back in the day that would play like defensive end and like left guard, and I'm like,
I was
why? And they're
I
like, this is the
was
greatest thing ever, and I'm like, this is weird.
I was hoping to do a Road to Glory as a punter so I could go to Iowa and
Ugh.
really make a name for myself, but you can't do that unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, so it's fun. And then you get into obviously the gameplay and you're locked in the single player. So if you're playing, I have found if you're playing as a quarterback, your team's going to call a lot of run plays. And if you're running back, your team's going to call a lot of passing plays. And if you're a receiver, they're never throwing to you, at least in the beginning. Over time, that changes. I had in the first season, I had a quarterback. It was at Northern Illinois, had a good first season. I had one game that was a big breakout game. And all of a sudden, we start passing the ball more. So it felt like a kind of more authentic, like, hey, you've shown you can do this. Let's give you the ball more. Then, when you get to the end of the season, you can enter the transfer portal. They've put that in here where you get to kind of choose where you want to go. It gives you like a breakdown of your expected role with the team, whether it's a good fit, whether there's coach stability. And so you get to pick where you want to go from amongst different options. So, like, I had a good season with Northern Illinois. The best school that I was able to get to was Auburn. So I wasn't able to go to like a Georgia or an Oregon or something like that, but I was able to move up. So you can go up and do that. And it's really neat to be able to kind of go through that experience, or you could choose to go back to where you were. So that's been a cool experience to just kind of see what different options come up and how
So
they implemented
how
that.
how is the how do you think the gameplay play different from like say we hop into like a play now game or even dynasty game versus like the road to glory? Because obviously you are player locked with road to glory. I mean, I guess quarterback not as much thing, but I guess seeing the overall wear and tear system we have it there. But how do you think it works between just playing a normal game versus playing the road to glory where you're just controlling one player?
Yeah, I think it's depending on the position, it's harder. Playing as a quarterback, it's harder because you'll get run plays where there's an open hole, but the guy doesn't hit it. He goes a different direction. So that's a little frustrating. You're also limited in just the plays you can choose. So even if you feel like there's a certain, you only get so many times where you can change the play. So it's at least in the beginning that expands as you go on. But if you feel like, hey, they're stacking the box, why are we calling a halfback dive on 3rd and 7? You are very limited in what you can do about that. You can't audible out of it and things like that in the beginning. So it's a little frustrating, the limitations, but also again, that's kind of the whole point is you're being put at the mercy of the coach because you are the player trying to live this experience. So it does make it harder as you get through that. But it is definitely an adjustment because all these new mechanics, the new passing mechanic, but even the new different ways to make cuts as a runner and things like that, if you're playing as a quarterback, you can't do. But same if you're playing as a receiver or a running back, you can't choose the type of passes that are coming to you. So it does make things a lot more challenging as you're limited in the systems you can use. The one upside is you don't have to kick in Road to Glory. That is nice.
So for those saying kicking is by far the hardest part in this game, and it is the
Kicking, it
most
is the Elden Ring of college football mechanics.
I don't man. I go for it. At this point, I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna go for it because I can't kick a field goal. I've missed 3 extra points so far.
Yeah.
I've gotten better at those, but it is the amount of time where it's 3rd and 7, and I'm like, I think I'll just line up in the middle of the field versus going for the first down because I just know if I mess this up, I'm just gonna shank this and take out a poor person in the stands. It is
Yeah.
so hard.
Well, and like if you miss the accuracy meter that's going, if you can still be in the green, but like to the left or right, and you'll shank the kick.
Yeah.
Which there's a part of me that goes, man, I've watched a lot of college kickers. That's pretty
No, they're
realistic,
no. It. I mean, I
but
get it.
it's
It's
so
pretty bad, but
frustrating.
gosh, it is extremely difficult. It looked difficult when I saw them announce it, and then trying it. I was like, you know what? I'll pick this up. And every time I think I got it, I kick it, and I probably might as well just kicked it backwards.
Hey, shout out to college kickers though, because they're all sitting here like, yeah, now you know what it's like.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
so
They're probably
easy.
like, yeah, yeah.
All that crap
They're the
online.
only ones who won out of this ordeal was showing everybody that, oh my gosh, especially if you play on the road with all the tempo stuff in the
Oh
atmosphere,
my
like that bar
God.
moves so fast. There's no point. There's not
Well,
even a point.
we didn't even talk about that a lot in the gameplay, but man, the home field advantage is so important.
Yeah.
You'll get plays where like not only will it not show you the right play when you're trying to see what you've done, but it's not showing you like what button the receivers are after you've hiked the ball. Like it
Sometimes it shows
is
you the wrong play.
sometimes I've had times where like I've called a pass play and when I go to show myself the play, it shows me a run play.
Yeah, no, I've had it show me the
Like
wrong play before.
it's insane. So that is really, and then obviously you can develop traits where that doesn't affect your players
Right.
or your teams as much. So those are really important again when you're choosing what to upgrade and things like that. But when you're just playing a regular play now game, there's some really cool atmospheres, but then it also just makes it so challenging for other players. It gets louder, like it's harder to hear. It's so cool in the way they handle that, and that's the other thing with college football that's cool versus like the Madden games where home field advantage doesn't matter, but it's huge here. And the way they implemented it makes an already challenging game even more challenging.
Yeah, which I mean, I guess we can head right into basic the biggest game mode that everybody was anticipating was the Dynasty modes. They obviously have an offline and an online. I know we probably should talk about the gameplay, but I just knew home field advantage coming into the Dynasty is what you want to build. All those like key upgrades, abilities.
Mhm.
Basically, you can create a coach or make one. We know they do not have the licensing or whatever for the coaches, so you get a lot of weird stuff going on with the coach
Yep.
names and players. I'll start off the bat with the dynasty. Um, I I understand making limited coaches, but why do I get a T-shirt or just a jacket, man?
Yep. No, when you create a player for Road to Glory, you have like all these customization options. You can do all these like really neat things. And I mean, there's just some limitations, but it's cool. Then you get to create a coach and you're like, cool, here's your preset faces. Do you want a t-shirt or a jacket?
Yeah, I people are like, what, you wanted a full kit? I was like, no, man, but I knew I wanted to be able to choose more than at least a t-shirt or a jacket.
Yeah, well, and most, Dynasty sickos, like we're getting into this to feel like an actual coach. So give me the chance to feel like an actual coach.
Yeah,
I
no.
miss when you could do like the sweater vest and a visor, like the Gus
Oh,
Malzahn look.
oh, it was great. I love the
It's
visor look.
so great.
Can't go anything wrong with that. But no, dynasty mode, getting into there. They've revamped some of the recruiting. Obviously, they redid all the coaching because we always had skill tree, but now it operates a little differently and whatnot else. I'm like, there's some parts of this dynasty I feel like they nailed, and there's some parts I think they swung and missed. How have you feel hopping in? I believe you played about a season or two. Where are you at on just the overall dynasty mode here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit more of a casual Dynasty player. I'm an offline Dynasty. Don't really do. I mean, I did online Dynasty back in the day, but now I just don't have the willpower and the sicko mindset to do that. So I've been a little more casual, more of just kind of building up a UCF program and going through that. So I found it's pretty easy to get a hang of in terms of just the bare bones when you're just going through it. It's a pretty easy pick up and play process to understand what it is that you're doing with your coaches when you're developing the coaching tree, what you're doing when you're going through with your players and recruiting. It's very on the surface, very solid and gives you enough information to do well. I think there are ways to dive deeper into the recruiting, which I've started to do. And I know for you, and you could talk more about this, your frustrations are just trying, I guess, you like to do really, really involved recruiting, and it's not as easy to do that as it used to be.
Yeah, no, for me, this game, it's been weird. This game feels like Starfield for me, which I've told people like I enjoyed Starfield, but I think there's a time limit of Starfield where on the surface and what you get into, you're like, oh, this is fun, really good. And then after a certain amount of playtime, you start to see some of the like not gaping, but some of the holes and some of the cracks and things start to tether. And I think recruiting in some of the dynasty mode is probably where, for me, that's where it goes. Um, I'll start with the coaching because I think the coaching part, before we get into recruiting, I think they did that very well. I love the actual like tree, the RPG aspects. I enjoy that you do not have control of your coordinators and they develop on their own, to be honest. I thought that was very in 14, that was just kind of one of the things I was like, yeah, you get to control your coordinators and build them up. And then apparently they leave and they suck all the time because they were built for you. And so I like that they having their own autonomy and diving into the goals and how they added everything because I do it adds very much complexity and the kind of the as I said the RPG aspect. I do kind of feel that when it comes to making your coaching staff. I think some of the goals can be challenging for sure.
Yes.
Like you're like, hey, win 2 national titles to unlock this. I'm like, oh, so we're never doing this or in
Yep.
like 10 years. Which I think is to the point of I think they wanted this to be a long-standing thing for players who like, yeah, I play 20, 15, 20 years and it can take 20 years. I guess from coaching outside of that, do you have any like did you any far as the trees or anything that stood out?
No, I've enjoyed it. It's nice to be able to go in and customize your coach and go certain routes. It is, like you said, some of the things are really hard to unlock, so it does limit you a little bit. But again, real development is locked behind certain things, so you've got to figure out
Yep.
ways to do it to get these certain things. So I think it's cool. I'm not like it's not the most important thing to me. That kind of RPG aspect, I'm like, yeah, it's fine. But the way they implement it is really nice. And it's, again, I think the thing for me is it's very simple to just pick up and go with it and to understand it. And then at the surface level, but then there is also some more depth to it if you want to be more like really thinking about it and planning things out and arranging what you're doing as a coach to try to unlock certain things or unlocking certain things because you have a certain goal in mind. So I think it does give some options there and adds more complexity to that, which is cool.
Yeah. Now, far as the recruiting stuff goes, adding, they made a big deal about how they broke up the pipelines. They talked about how they did visits. They talked about how they did this new pitching, swing, hard pitching, which is some of the stuff. If you've done other recruiting, you've seen they've always had like the play style, the playing time, A, B, C's, everything else, your school. I do like the dynamics that I did of like now you can see your school move up or move down and they tell you how to improve. Because that was always the fun part of like, yo, how do we get this thing better on our school? I don't know. Just win, baby. Just win. And that's all you do. And you hope it goes up. But no, now seeing of like, oh, you need to win national broadcast games. You need to have, win conference championship. sign certain things or, complete certain like pat yards or totals or whatever else to go up. I think it's been nice. Um, some of the problems when we start getting into for me was being like as an option player, I feel frustrated with recruiting quarterbacks of I don't know if anybody noticed, but field general, improviser, and scrambler, which are the archetype for the quarterbacks, they all how to improve their playing style for each one is just based off of passing yards. Congratulations. So if you pass the ball good, they all like you. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. But that's been an issue there. But the big one is probably recruiting. We get into you have all these recruits that give you all this information, between their, the height, their weight, the pipelines. They redid the pipelines to make them like not just single states and everything else. But then it's kind of like, cool, what does my board look like? And trying to go through each individual recruit, having to see just a general overview of stuff, I think becomes tedious after a while, or like frustrating after a while. Because yeah, as a person who kind of spends a lot of time in recruiting and always has, having just like an overview, having a, your recruiting board. They call that, but at the end of the day, like I have to scroll through everybody just to be able to see where I'm at. And it just takes more time. I do know over the years, like recruiting kind of has been redone, everything, because before it was very tedious. And then obviously they kind of made it not so tedious, but then they tried to make that and then they blend whatsoever. But I think having just like some better ways of like between the filtering system and just kind of showcasing some of the recruit information in a more palatable way would be helpful. Because like right now, if I were like, hey, what are the, how many recruits do my number one on their board right now? I couldn't tell you without having to basically sit there and scroll through every single recruit to tell you that. Versus if I had a board with everybody laid out like a listicle, I could just, look down a list. And I think that kind of helped. But probably the biggest one is pipelines. They spend all this time talking about pipelines. There are pipeline influences now between 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I don't know what that means at this point, other than you get more influence, I'm assuming by there. But the big thing is I don't know what my pipelines are for the most part as a school.
Yeah, it used to
And
like be on a map and it would show you
yeah,
like the states would be like a certain color if they were a
yeah.
pipeline. And
Yeah, they had a
that's
map. They do
gone.
not have a map anymore. At least I've not been able to find it. But now it's just like you sort by pipeline and hope these people end up being in your pipeline. I don't know who's all in this pipeline. I've not been able to identify all of the pipelines. I do not know what my school's pipelines are. I have a coaching pipeline, but I don't know how that plays into effect yet. I'm assuming something to do with the thing. I'm not entirely sure. And I think that's just been kind of the problem of like, it looks like they added a bunch of stuff, but it just feels like there's just like some like layers of like menuing or UI or interface stuff that just like kind of got left out. And I think one of that is like, yeah, like a pipeline map. Like who's even coming out of this pipeline? I have no idea. Like what are my pipelines? I don't know. And I think that's where we kind of get into the frustrating part for me in recruiting of like, I think it's still somewhat challenging in knowing stuff and you can easily sort and just find things relatively, like, oh, I just need players. So sort who likes my school, who kind of maybe fits, click go. But if you want to go in like, hey, I'd like to build a pipeline or, hey, I want to see like to make sure I focus on a pipeline for help, it just feels like you don't know what you're doing in that realm.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously they tried to revamp the system. They
Yes.
tried to make some of the things more involved and more realism has been kind of the whole theme for the entire game, right? They're trying to make everything
Yes.
feel more real, and in so many ways they succeeded. And in recruiting, that you can see the idea and you can see on the surface level if you're not trying to get crazy in depth, you can pick it up and it does a fairly good job. I wouldn't say recruiting is broken. It's not bad. It's not like
There are a
complete
few broken things, but they have acknowledged that they're broken and will be
true.
fixed. But overall, yeah, I don't think it's completely
Yeah.
broken.
But I think there's the issue of when you radically change a system that had been around for so long and workshop for so long, especially after so much time away where everybody's used to an older system, some things kind of slip through the cracks in terms of just making it simpler to find and to understand, or just simply like you're missing a map or you're missing listing things a certain ways. The good thing is obviously when a good core structure is there, it's easier to just add those things in the future, whether
Absolutely.
it's updates or in a future game. But there's even some things how like one of the things you used to be able to do is go and look at a player and push triangle or Y and see like their career stats or see like go through all of that from a same menu. Now, if I go into season stats or if I go to my roster and I click on a player, I can't actually go look through his stats. So that makes it harder, especially now that the transfer portal exists in recruiting, to be able to go through and find these players and find their stats and kind of be keeping an eye on stuff throughout the seasons to see who might be someone that goes into the portal, who's like a good group of five quarterback, that might be in the portal and have trades like that. So there's a lot of menu thing and UI things where the depth that used to exist is not there anymore. And some of that is because they just revamped the system and it's going to take, hopefully they will eventually realize, hey, we left this out and we need to fix this.
Yeah.
So there's things to tweak with, but it is a little bit like when you're trying to get more involved and you're used to it being easy to get more involved, it is definitely frustrating that those options are more
Yeah,
limited.
that's been my thing because I've been like, okay, how much of this has been my own personal preference of what I like and enjoy and used to versus like how much is this like just generally, I don't want to say bad, but like just kind of missing and something particularly are bad, maybe are bad. And it's been, I would say it started with maybe some preference, but then as I got further and further adjusting, we talked about the RPO system and the other controls there, like, okay, that I had my preference, but I learned, I saw the logic, I did it. Versus this stuff, like I genuinely just do not know, and definitely think a lot of it's weird. They feel like they're missing a lot of information in the menu, but I also feel like everything is also stuck in menus, like finding statistics, finding things. It's just
Mm-hmm.
clicking through menus, and I'm like, yo, man, like what are we doing here? Um, which kind of leads to probably the biggest gripe I would have is probably more in the online Dynasty one, where before you had, when you came in the online Dynasty, you basically had like an overview that said, hey, here's everybody, all the users, players, here are their games, here's what their scores are. You can click on their drop box, you can see who won, who restarted, who did not, blah, blah, blah. And that was what you had. And I didn't mind if they revamped it, but now every single part of the online Dynasty from that aspect is now buried in menus. So essentially, if I go in there, I have this menu of my game in order to check to see, like I can rate to advance, but in order to see if anybody else is done, I have to then go all the way to Dynasty Hub, and then I have to click on members, and I have to see what they've done, and also it doesn't fit on my TV screen, so I have to scroll over and have to see if everybody's there is ready. And then if you want to see if anybody restarted their game, then you have to back out of that. Then you have to go to scoring schedules, and then you have to look through that. And then the biggest thing that I've also noticed is they don't apparently let you sort by user anymore, where they just pull up user stats. To where all the people that are played. So if I have 7 people in there, instead of just sorting, being like, oh, I just want to look at what are the 7 people of my dynasty playing and what are their records, what are their scores, that is not available. And it's
Mm-hmm.
all been mixed into one. And so it is just like to check of see if like whatever game, what if we have 7 people, what are the scores of their games? Did anybody restart their game? Did they play their game? It takes like 12 buttons or something like that and scrolling through 4 to 5 different menus. And I'm like, yo, why did we not just have like a hub menu? And I think that's probably been the most frustrating part. And that's what sucks because I think there is a lot of good and some of these new systems have been integral. I think like with pipeline stuff, I think it was cool they made like 5 different sets of influences. I think it's cool they made like South Florida, Central Florida. But at some point, while they do work on the back end that you can't see, they do just become like magic mystery law hand of who knows what's happening from the front end that you cannot see what's happening. Player development works the same way, which is funny because we talked about Road to Glory, how you saw your player development, you choose that stuff. All those menus and UI stuff is integrated into the Dynasty. Just you have no control, you don't know what anything means, and they just kind of go up. You don't know when, or you don't know how. You just play,
Yeah,
baby, do
it's just
better.
yep. No, I think there's a lot of like it's those little things that end up having a bigger impact the more involved you are in the game. I think for the most part, it's there's a solid base with a lot of these things. Like you said, like
Yes.
the pipelines are cool and it's cool to see it work its magic, but it's magic because
Yeah,
we
it's
don't
just
really know
magic
how
and
it works. We just kind
yeah.
of it's just kind of happening. They're just sitting there and there's like some like gremlins in the game that are just magically making pipelines, players appear in the pipeline. So yeah, I think those the big complaint I would have, and I wouldn't necessarily call it a complaint, but more just something to be improved is just making it so it's easier to navigate these menus and to see a lot of the information that's there. And we just either we can't access it or it's so buried that we haven't figured out how yet because
Yes.
it's, and we've been diving through the menus
Yes.
because we both probably have, I mean, I have like 80 hours since the game has come out in this
I
game.
meant to look and I forgot to look for his recruiting, but I'm probably somewhere obviously around there as well.
Yeah, and that's like with working and all sorts of other things. Like, I mean, that's just like I had a buddy I was texting today. I was like, "Hey, let's play this weekend." He's like, "It's literally all I've been doing since it came out." So it's like, people were spending all this time and like digging through things and haven't quite figured all of those things out. And I think some of it is just missing, and that the attention was spent so much on all these other things that these were kind of afterthoughts. But again, if the structure is good, those are at least much easier to fix because those are issues that won't affect everybody. Like
Absolutely.
not every player is gonna care that you can't see all the pipeline stuff because a lot of them are probably just gonna ignore it, or just go, hey, it's working, cool. That's fine by me. I got a 5-star recruit. So I think it's definitely something they can continue to improve on for those of us that like to get into the menus a little bit more, especially for you because I know you like and online dynasties you have to really get into it. Just find any little crumb you can to get an upper hand. So I think there's small changes that they can be made. I will say though, the fact that we've already seen notes about here's some things we're fixing, whether it's graphics things, whether it's gameplay things, whatever, does give me hope that this is a team that understands what they're doing and they've understood all along that this is not just a yearly release you can churn out. You've got to nail this. And I think they are listening and trying to, they're not going to fix everything at once and they're not going to fix everything ever because that's just the
Yeah.
reality.
No,
Like
that's been the
there's always
thing
going
of
to be
like, what
some
can
new
they
problem.
yeah, that's been my bit. What can they realistically do now versus maybe not? But no, I think that obviously we didn't talk about some of the sim logic that we know that they're already addressing and doing of like some of the weirdest parts where 7 and 6 teams are making the playoffs.
FCS Southeast, which is apparently a powerhouse, just
Yeah,
absolutely obliterating people.
yeah, they have some of that with the ratings and everything else. That is fine. I'm pretty sure they'll get worked out. It is kind of an annoyance, especially as a person who's stuck in a dynasty with the Pac-12 that only plays one conference game. It's messed up, and I made it before they told us the workaround of how to do it. And so I'm like, oh wow. But no, that stuff we know they're going to address and figure out. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but no, there are just some of the menus and UI stuff that I hope. And I think it's the hard part with this being a year release because it, like I said, it reminds me, like I said, probably a Starfield where I think the game has a lot of good building blocks, a lot of good structures. There's a lot of cool things in there. They nail some of the stuff, but there are some systems in here that are like, oh, this is kind of cool. But like you kind of, once you dig a little further, like, oh, and you're like, can you fix that? And they're like, yeah, we will maybe over time. But the question is, with being a year release, which we're assuming that's good, this is what this is going to be, how much is going to be fixed this year versus maybe next year, or like you said, or even ever if they just like it. um, I did want to ask what your, because I know they put out a statement of like the logic on what they want to do in Dynasty. What did you think of their, I guess, logical of how they're trying to build a path of Dynasty to where they do not want every Dynasty to be the same 5, 10, 15 years of playing. And so that leads to some teams falling very off and some teams building up and doing stuff. Did you like this logic? Do you buy this? Like, where are we at on this? I thought it was a very interesting release. That's why I want to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I like the idea of it.
Yes.
I like the idea that not every dynasty is going to be the same. You could have one where, Alabama and Georgia fall off within 2 years, and you can have one where you get some like, Toledo becomes a powerhouse. Like I think having some spontaneity to it is great because that is again, that's part of college football. You get teams that come out of nowhere and become really good, and it's part of what makes it fun. And you have teams that were once good, like USC or Texas, that end up being bad for like a decade plus before they finally get back to being good. So I like that there's that. The execution has been a little hit or miss. I know in my dynasty or in my might have been my road to glory, I played a 6-5 Alabama that was ranked 10th in the nation. So there's some things where like, okay, I see what you're doing, like they're falling off, but also they're still ranked highly because this is it's not it's something that they're still working on and they've acknowledged that they're working on
Right.
it.
Well, I know they have. That's why I just want to see like what your thoughts of like changing. Because I am with you of like there were points in the old games like, hey, we know these 15 teams are always going to be so high level. Unless you purposely go in there and start messing with them in their conference, like they're not changing.
Yeah, so I like the idea of it. I think it's just got to be tweaked a bit to make it a little bit more realistic. But I do, which they're doing. So I appreciate A, I like what they're trying to do, and B, I appreciate the communication. So shortly after the release of like, hey, we hear you, like we're working on it. This is what we were trying to do. It's clearly needs a little bit of work still, and we're gonna keep doing it because I think that's the thing EA gets a lot of stick for, where they just kind of release things and then forget about them. So I think the fact that they've been so vocal right off the bat tells you again that this is a team that does not want to screw this up. They do not want to let something sit there that people aren't going to enjoy, because this is the type of game college football game fans will not buy another release if this one isn't good. It's not like FIFA or Madden where they've just kept coming and they've kept coming and they've slowly gotten worse and worse over time, and people just keep doing it because they're, it's like, and with like things like Call of Duty 2, I know obviously not EA, but just this idea of like the things that consistently release, people just get so used to buying them that it becomes almost an addiction. Whereas college football, it's been gone for so long, we could all just go back to playing NCAA 13. I still have my disc because I
The
messed
funny
up
part is
and
you keep
didn't sell
mentioning
it.
13. I would love to play 13. We realized that we could not find enough copies for us to play 13 because I said I don't like the defense of 14. 13's great.
Yeah, no, 13 is I think still at least for now the undisputed GOAT. But I think this is the thing where that's where they realize is like, man, if we don't nail this and if we don't fix it, nobody was expecting it to be perfect right off the bat. I don't think, for a lot of reasons, whether it's that you're an EA hater and you just assume they're gonna make bad things, or just the fact that like you're not gonna recreate everyone's like early years. You're not gonna be able to recreate the glory days right off the bat. It took time for the NCAA games to get to where they were. There were some duds in there, and there were some things that when you look back, if you go play NCAA, 05,
Oh
it's not
five
as
is
good.
bad. Oh five is
That's what
terrible.
I mean. Like there's some real stinkers in there, and it took time to figure out what it was that made these games really good. And so there's a lot of faith with the communication that they've had so far. Not just communicating what they're doing, but communicating why they're doing it. It does make you feel a lot better about the direction things are going to continue to go. And there's a lot of faith that there will be improvements, because they know that the loyalty of this audience is not going to be
I know.
secured just by, putting out whatever.
No, I think for being out of the box for what we got, I'm actually impressed. I think they did a very good job. I like I said, they're definitely can still do, but not. I guess I know we've been going for a while. Ultimate Team's a thing.
I clicked on
I've
it to open my
I
pre-order
clicked yeah,
packs, and that was it.
I clicked on it. I played it.
Apparently, there's tutorials in there you were mentioning.
Yes,
There's
there
like,
are
I didn't know
tutorials, there
that.
are challenges, stuff. It's look, Ultimate Team can offer some cool things. I also know what Ultimate Team's done to other sports games over the last decade. In concept, I like Ultimate Team. I think this one has done some cool things. Just kind of, looking through some of the things that you can do, whether it be challenges, the moments they're adding, and whatnot else. Ultimate Team exists. That's all I want to say. I don't want to say anymore. Um,
It is not my first, second, or third game mode choice. That's for sure.
yeah, we'll go with that one. But no, I guess for kind of, I know we're going, I guess to kind of get some final thoughts in here. I guess what are you looking forward to most as we get into college football season, and I guess seeing what this team does and this game in particular does as we move forward into the season?
I'm really excited to see how they update both the rosters and the player ratings. This is something they talked about. Obviously, right now in July, rosters aren't set yet. There's still plenty of things to change. We're gonna find, you get all the time in college football. You get some guy that's like a third string running back, and he ends up being a Heisman candidate. So I think we're gonna get. They've already talked about doing all the in-season player ratings. The question is gonna be, how often do they do it? Is it a weekly thing? Does it take a little bit longer? But the fact that you'll be able to play as, I remember in the old games, like Johnny Manziel was the year he had his like best season ever, was like a 70 something overall in the game, and they weren't updating things. So here it'll be nice to see those updates as the season progresses. Maybe players that they thought were going to be good, cough cough, Shador Sanders, might get downgraded a little bit if they're not as good, and you'll get some other players that, who, if they come out of nowhere and have a great season, you'll get the opportunity to see that. So that's going to be cool to see that live in season support. And then does that support also come along with making some tweaks to whether it be the gameplay, the Super Sim engine, or some of the menus and UI things as well?
Yeah, that's about where I am because when I speak to people or when I talk to people, I'm like, look, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know 14 had maybe a patch or so. But at the end of the day, it was the time before we had really patches and doing things. games now get updates all the time, even sports games, like they're constantly being updated, whether it be fine tuning, adding tweaks and everything else. I think the only thing they did in 14 that I remember was taking out some cards for reasons they had to.
Yep.
But outside of that, like I'm intrigued to see what we can get as far as whether it's fine tuning the gameplay a little bit or just kind of like said, adding different like player ratings, rosters, logos, and or even just kind of like the super sim logic, or even we get some menus because it's interesting to see if like what is the possibility. Some things can happen. Some things like, oh wow, this changed quite often. And so would be interesting to see. I'm excited. I've been enjoying for what we got so far. And yeah, is there any, I guess, final thoughts at this before we get out of here?
I felt from the first moment I was playing and still now, over 80 hours later of gameplay, I feel very rewarded. I feel like the wait was worth it. I feel like it's very rare for me to go into a game nowadays and look at the flaws and be willing to have patience and being able to say, listen, like, yeah, there's some things that aren't super great, but there are a lot of things that are incredible. And I think they nailed the important things, which is the gameplay, the atmosphere, the general kind of feel of the college football experience. And I think just the general going through the modes is very solid. So I love loading up and playing and feeling that magic every time. It's made me like really impatient for the start of college football season. Um, so I'm so glad that it's back and in a way that exceeded the expectations in terms of it's not a Madden reskin. It's not it doesn't feel like a lazily put together cash cow. This feels like very clearly a passion project for the people who worked on it, and that seeps into the gameplay as a player and makes it so worth the time.
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I think when I started playing, I was excited for being back. I think they nailed, like I said, a lot of the gameplay mechanics of stuff. I think they brought back what I enjoy and what I miss. I think just even from the community aspect of players, you're seeing people get back together. I know I've been playing with people that I've not played or done anything with in years, just because like, oh, that's what we played every year. That's not there. So seeing how that goes, I think having it back just feels good. And I'm just intrigued to see what we're gonna get and how it's gonna go. And I'm excited for, I'm also I'm excited to see what college football looks like in general from the general audience standpoint now that this game is back. Because at the end of the day, they've shown it with other sports games and other stuff of like when people play, a particular sports game, they learn about the sport. You learn the players, and now that you have the quote like real names of players, you're gonna learn people's names. You're gonna know who plays on rosters. You know, if you lead them to a championship or you lost to them, are you gonna root for them in real life? And that is something they've kind of shown a little bit on with other games and sports stuff. And college football has been lacking that. And we've seen a lot. Well, college football, you can argue popularity has either gone higher or lower at this point. I don't really know. It's kind of gone up. Feels like it's gone down. I don't really know between all the changes and everything. And we don't know what its future looks like. We do know having this game and giving us some of the options to change stuff and rebuild conferences and do some stuff that I think people are going to enjoy and just at least feel like, oh, I can enjoy college football even if it's just in this game for a while. Cool. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for joining me. I guess can you tell everybody where they can find you at as we get out of here?
You can find me on Threads or Blue Sky at KFoleyFL.
Awesome. And obviously you can find me at butwhythough.net with my writing and obviously on this channel doing other reviews. So you're supposed to, was it the click, like, subscribe, double bell, ping ping. I don't know.
Comment about how great our insights are
Oh,
and how
absolutely.
brilliant we are.
And then among other things on the interwebs and everything else. But yeah, well, thanks for joining me and goodbye.